In a dramatic escalation that has sent shockwaves through global diplomacy, US President Donald Trump has reignited tensions with Europe by linking future trade tariffs directly to an extraordinary demand: the acquisition of Greenland, an autonomous territory governed by Denmark. In a late-night post on Truth Social, Trump abruptly derailed months of fragile trade negotiations, warning that if Europe does not agree to a deal allowing the United States to buy Greenland, his administration will impose sweeping tariffs on a group of European nations, beginning with 10% in February and escalating sharply to 25% by June. The ultimatum has placed Europe on a fast-moving collision course with Washington, transforming what had been a sensitive diplomatic disagreement into a high-stakes confrontation between long-standing allies. European leaders were caught off guard by the tone and timing of the threat, which left little room for manoeuvre or compromise and underscored a new era of confrontational geopolitics in transatlantic relations. For Europe, the challenge is uniquely complex. Greenland is not only an autonomous territory under Danish control, but Denmark itself is a member of both the European Union and NATO, making any suggestion of a forced takeover politically explosive. European officials have repeatedly stressed that Greenland is not for sale and that its future must be determined by its people, not dictated by outside pressure. Yet Trump's tariff threat has significantly narrowed Europe's options, as any strong economic retaliation risks provoking a broader conflict with the very country that underpins Europe's security architecture. The United States remains Europe's most critical military partner through NATO, and that dependence weighs heavily on policymakers as Russia's war in Ukraine continues to dominate the continent's security priorities. In recent weeks, European governments had attempted to manage Trump's fixation on Greenland through appeasement and dialogue. Many officials privately dismissed his earlier statements about acquiring the island, even by force, as negotiating tactics rather than concrete policy. In that context, a group of European nations dispatched military personnel to Greenland last week for joint exercises intended to demonstrate unity and reinforce Europe's commitment to Arctic security. Instead of easing tensions, those exercises may have backfired, as the same countries involved are now reportedly among those targeted by Trump's proposed tariffs. The US president has repeatedly argued that American ownership of Greenland is essential for strengthening security in the Arctic, a region of growing strategic importance as climate change opens new shipping routes and intensifies competition among global powers. As Trump's rhetoric hardened, European optimism that quiet diplomacy could defuse the crisis quickly evaporated. Within hours of the Truth Social post, members of the European Parliament announced plans to freeze the ratification of a trade deal negotiated last summer between Trump and Ursula von der Leyen, signalling that Europe was prepared to respond rather than simply absorb the pressure. Calls for retaliation grew louder, and ambassadors from across the EU's 27 member states moved to convene emergency meetings in Brussels to assess their next steps. Among the options on the table is the EU's so-called anti-coercion instrument, informally described by officials as a trade bazooka designed specifically to counter political and economic pressure. The tool could allow Europe to impose restrictions on major American technology companies and service providers that rely heavily on access to European markets, a move that would sharply escalate the dispute and potentially reshape the global trade landscape. Despite the growing momentum toward retaliation, European leaders remain deeply divided over how far they should go. A full-scale trade war with the United States could inflict serious damage on Europe's already fragile economy and carry consequences well beyond commerce, potentially spilling over into defence cooperation and foreign policy coordination. At the same time, many officials warn that failing to respond forcefully could embolden further coercive tactics. Von der Leyen struck a careful balance in a public statement, emphasising that dialogue remains essential while cautioning that tariffs risk triggering a dangerous downward spiral. Yet behind the scenes, recent diplomatic efforts have produced little progress. Talks held last week in Washington between US officials, Danish representatives and Greenlandic leaders ended without a breakthrough. And optimism faded rapidly after the White House described a proposed working group as being focused on America's acquisition of Greenland, reinforcing fears that Washington's position is non-negotiable.